Hi, my name is Harrison Taylor. This is my AEP 858 Educational Leadership Case Study. Okay, first, in summarizing the case, first exactly what was happening in this case study. There's an incident where one student with a checkered past, his name was James, had given a set of brass knuckles to another student, David, in the hallway, who's an honor student. There was a teacher that witnessed this happening, thought it was drugs being passed in the hallway, and reported it to the administrator, Richard. Richard brought both students to the office, questioning with a police officer. When questioned, David was scared that the officer searched him, finding was when he was questioned, then the officer searched him and was able to find the brass knuckles. James did admit that he had given these brass knuckles to David, and the principal had worked a lot with James and was kind of impressed that he was willing to fess up to that. Both students would be detained by the police, I believe, face possible felonies and a district-long suspension because of this weapon, mandated some suspensions. Richard, he did not want to fill out the paperwork to suspend David. David was a high-achieving academic student, never had any issues at all. This is the first time ever, and he thought that it was possible that James was forcing him to carry these. And then Richard, the administrative supervisor, said that he would write an official reprimand in Richard's file if he did not follow through with the suspension, even though he did understand, what the dilemma was. This happened at the school, in the hallway, and as well also in the administrator's office, and would be ongoing after that. People that were involved, the principal, he'd be really concerned about the well-being of the students in the school, keeping it safe, as well as the students involved specifically. James and David, they're going to be facing charges and consequences based off this. The parents, they're going to have to deal with the ramifications of the decisions the students made. And James' parents kind of, acted like, he needed to learn his lesson and keep him in jail. And David's parents were more alarmed and, weren't accustomed to this type of thing. The supervisor of the administrator, he needs to make sure that administrators following the guidelines, and then the police, obviously, they're going to have to follow up on their end with their protocols with students breaking the law. So, any legal or ethical issues, people that have been harmed in this case, David and James, obviously, they are kind of perpetrators, but they're going to have to face consequences for this. David has, almost more to risk just because he seemed to have a pretty good trajectory. That could definitely change. And then the student body and the staff, this is obviously an issue of safety at the school. It has to be handled, and they want it to be a good working learning environment. And the administrator, he wants the students and staff to be safe, and these young men as well. Also, he wants what's best for all parties involved, and he's also maybe getting himself in some trouble by refusing to report David. This action would obviously come up with some existing laws just because brass knuckles are considered a weapon, and I think this district's policy is that it's a mandatory, I think 45 days, so it's a mandatory long-term suspension for this type of infraction. Okay, so as far as breach of contract and discrimination, the administrator, if he doesn't follow through, he'll break procedure because they have mandated students have to be suspended for this action, and then also. If James is pressuring David, forcing him to hold on to these, that would obviously be some bullying harassment going on there as well. Okay, so just in one sentence, the issue at hand is 2 students have been found to break school policy in difficult circumstances. In synthesizing these facts, there's first, one key player is Richard, the administrator. He questioned both students together. He did say that was probably a mistake, clearly, and it would have probably been better to question them separately. He has a standing relationship with James, wants him to have success, and a lot of respect for David. David hasn't ran into anything like this ever before, and so he needs to make the best decision, and there could be consequences if he doesn't follow through. The teacher, staff, and students, that were not involved, they're definitely important here because of the school safety, teacher reporting the incident. Obviously, they want this to be followed through with. The parents, of the students, for sure, they're going to have to deal with all of this. And then, it's possible that parents outside of that, just if other students would hear about it, would be worried about safety. And then these two students involved, they're obviously, that's going to be a big deal. They have consequences coming up, all those types of things. So this incident took place in the school hallway. This school is a lower demographic of students, talks about being the south side, kind of having that connotation. And then also, this is a public school, from anything I could read, not a ton of information on the school itself. Okay, so prioritizing this information, I think stakeholders, this would be a big deal for them because safety of the school, number one, and then also the future of these two individual students and the community, how is this handled, all those types of things. Groups that have an important stake, obviously David and his family, James and his family, kind of talked about those already. They're going to be facing consequences in that. The administrator, he has to set the precedent, make sure to follow procedure, and then he's worried about those students and their success as well. And then the supervisor, he needs to make sure to hold the administrator accountable, and so that's definitely involved there. And then I think that all the stakeholders have been, involved in here. Other district administration or maybe even consulting some lawyers might be important. And then it might be helpful to talk to teachers and students to see if they can figure out what happened leading up to this situation, maybe get more information, maybe David was being bullied, and then, I would feel comfortable making a decision with the information given. Okay, so a few options that I felt that could happen. The first would be to suspend David and James in accordance with the policy. Okay, so that'd be really taking no action, just following the school procedure. The second would be to suspend David, not to suspend David at all, but to suspend James. That's kind of what the administrator was trying to do in the case study. That seems maybe the most extreme to me. And then the third one, I thought you could work through some restorative justice, make a path for both students to learn and grow and work their way back into the building, maybe incrementally, or just have some supports in place while they're not in the building. So, with these options to suspend both David and James in the policy, the pros are it protects the administrators following procedure, and it removes these students, which, takes care of the safety problem, at least for that time period. The cons are that this is definitely going to change the trajectory of students' lives, and, the administrator is really struggling with this. So to not just suspend David, but to suspend James, that may not be fair depending on the situation, obviously. So some pros of that are that David won't have to experience all the consequences. It sounds like he would still have some legal consequences, but and the administrator felt he's doing right. Maybe David would lose as much academic time. And then some cons are that this could be a safety issue with students bringing weapons. It would break precedent and procedure, and this would cause issues with the administrator. He's going to get a letter in his file, all of those things. And then maybe, the third thing, some restorative justice and a path for students to grow and learn from this. Some pros are both students will receive consequences. They can learn from the experience and hopefully have more positive outcomes. So, kind of in between those two in some ways. And then some cons, the administrator you'd have to get this plan approved to not get a letter in his file. So you'd have to work with district staff probably to do that, district administrators. And then, the school staff and, stakeholders might not be happy about this decision. So that would be a factor for sure. That would be a negative. Okay, so choose the best option. I thought the restorative justice, having a path for students to learn and grow would be the best option in this situation. I want to make sure that which I did, go evaluate the decisions. As you get into new information, you have to reevaluate these decisions, how it's going to affect the groups mentioned. I think all the stakeholders have really been consulted, and I think this is definitely a more creative option, leaving more flexibility. So as far as implementing my decision, first thing I would want to do is I want to sit down with district leadership, see what the options are specifically available, Okay, there may be better options. I just want to make sure that what I'm proposing is doable and get it approved ahead of time. Then I'd want to sit down individually with the parents and students separately, not the two families and students together, and kind of present my plan. And maybe depending on flexibility, you could work together with these parents and students to come up with some plans to go forward. And then if the parties agreed, then we'd go forward on this plan and progress monitor it and all of that. So I think some possibilities is the parents and students might refuse. In that case, you'd probably just have to suspend them and then, or just normally follow the normal procedure. And there could be backlash, the community in the school, teachers, whoever is involved might feel like this is not harsh enough. And then who needs to know this? It'd be just teachers, staff involved, parents and students directly in the case, district level admin, and then building admin. I don't think you would want to just release this to the public. Obviously, it's confidential information. Some of that may get out with students at the school and things. You can't control that, but make sure that those involved know that need to. And then I'm gonna have to need with all of these outside factors and make sure to make the best plan, not just the students. And if this doesn't work, or if it does work, I'm gonna want to use this experience to mold future decisions and continue to make progress. Okay, so here are the standards. I thought this was an interesting case study for sure. I thought that this would be a difficult situation to deal with and one that administrator definitely would. So it's a good experience to go through it. And I appreciated this course.